appointment of a chair for this meeting. Can I have nominations? I would suggest that it is someone who is present in the chamber. So we're able to control the meeting on the mics. Can I call for nominations?
Can I nominate Paul, please?
And do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Is that agreed? Yep. I'll hand over to Councillor Finnegan.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, so we'll start. So good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Planning Applications Board. Can I remind you that the meeting has been recorded and the recording will be made available on the caller's website following the meeting. For those joining the meeting on Teams, please ensure that your microphones are muted, and if you are a member of the Planning Applications Board, please keep your cameras on. So we'll start with item 1, which is the minute of the meeting of the 11th of November 2025 for approval as to accuracy. Do I have your approval? Thanks. Item 2, just move on to item 2, is a declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest that they may have in any items of the agenda, and it will be helpful if members explain why they are declaring an interest in the items concerned. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Right, I'll just declare an interest in item 7. As I'm involved in the aquaculture industry, I have a vested interest, so I'll just go to the public gallery when that item's on. Okay, thanks. Right, so I would remind members that you need to consider if you're preempted the decision-making process by declaring support or opposition for the application in advance of the meeting, or by lobbying other members for a particular outcome before being able to participate in any planning decision. Any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, the chair will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Thereafter, the chair may at his discretion continue the business of the meeting in accordance with the timeout protocol dealing with amendments contrary to officer recommendations. A copy of the timeout protocol has been made available to all members via the Planning Applications Board folder on SharePoint. The planning officer will present the recommendation of officers. In the event of a member seeking to move an amendment, the chair may call upon the legal advisor or the planning advisor to provide advice to the board. Is that clear? Okay, right, thanks. So we'll move on to item 3. And item 3 is, let's see what we've got. The planning application is for various external and internal alterations to the former Tower Guest House in 32 James Street, Stornoway, Isle of Lewis. This planning application is considered by the appointed officer to raise sensitive issues and is therefore presented to the board for a decision. Helen MacDonald will speak to the report and answer any questions. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. You'll note on the agenda you've got 2 very similar looking applications. The first one's a planning application and the second one's a listed building application. So please forgive me if anything feels repeated, but they are 2 separate processes. So I'll take you through that. The first one we're looking at here is the planning application. It's for a change of use from guest house to house. It also includes works to demolish part of a boundary wall and the creation of a parking area and other related works. And it's at the former Tower Guest House at 32 James Street. Just to give you a wee indication of where the site is, I can get this to work. I'm always terrible with it. Oh no, hit and miss. I'm just going to have to rely on description. As you can see the small red boundary line to the centre right of your screen. Thank you so much, Fiona. And we are just further to the right of that in the main council building at the moment. So it's on the corner of James Street and Matheson Road. So quite a prominent site. As noted before, it's a planning application. It's for planning permission to change the use of the building, currently a guest house, although disused, to a house. It's within the mapped main settlement of Stornoway. The building is listed, category C, hence the listed application we'll look at later on. The site is within the Stornoway Conservation Area also, which requires the planning permission for external work such as demolition to the wall. The surroundings are predominantly residential, including houses, guest houses and a hotel, with the public road to the south and the Nicholson Institute past Matheson Road further to the east. Just so we zoomed in context there from where we were previously, you can see the mini roundabout, the front of the Cala Hotel to the south of the aerial image, and the site and surroundings outlined in red there. You'll see quite a lot of tree canopy on this aerial image. That is no longer on site if you see any disparities when we look at some of the images. To the right, you'll see the proposed site plan. You can see the intention to create a parking area to the rear of the property, and you can also see partial retention and partial demolition of that rear boundary wall, which backs onto Garden Road, which again you can see on the aerial image. This is the view of the site from James Street, taken just at the Cala Inn, looking back. It's the property centre right with the slightly faded red paint around the sandstone details of the property. You can see the Park Guest House to the left there. Just so we zoom in so you can see some of the details. We have some timber sash and case windows on the ground floor, UPVC windows on the first floor, and another sash and case in the attic tower. The roof condition you can see from there is not ideal, but all in all, the building is still intact. That's a view from Sandwick Road, looking at the Matheson Road elevation. There you can also see the small annex building now, which is the beige building with the buff orange coloured chimney. That's the view from Matheson Road to see the back elevation of Garden Road there, with the field gate, the steel field gate, and the boundary wall, the tall boundary wall at the rear, part of which is proposed for removal. Some more site images from within the site. You'll note from the report, this is reported not just due to a number of representations which you received, but because work had actually started without consent. So you'll see quite a bit of detail of that in the images. There's the annex building, the rear elevation which faces towards Garden Road, where you can see that there's already demolition of a porch, a modern porch that's been undertaken. This just takes you around the site to give you some context. You can see some demolition materials there and an awful lot of excavation work that has happened around the property. That is the elevation that faces the Park Guest House to the west, and you can see the slight undermining of the tall boundary wall that surrounds that elevation and the rear elevation as we move around. This is the internal view of the wall that's proposed for partial removal. You can see that there's been some modern intervention where it's either been previously damaged or has collapsed. Unsure of the exact reasons why, but you can see that it's been partially rebuilt in block. The point for removal comes just to the very end of the left-hand side of that image, so it will remove some of the original Bry shingle wall as well as the modern rebuild. And then you can see the field gate from the inside looking back out towards Garden Road and Matheson Road beyond. So 5 representations were received. In summary, the concerns were the impact on traffic and parking from the removal of the wall. I should note that originally the entire length of the wall on Garden Road was proposed for removal. That was subsequently reduced in negotiation with the applicant. However, many of the representations still maintain their concern over traffic and parking impacts. Also, the impact of the works on the character and appearance of the conservation area, impact upon the character of the listed building, and also impact on neighbouring properties in terms of amenity and privacy. The key planning issues assessed relate to the principle of development and the proposed use, potential for impacts on the historic building, its curtilage and the wider conservation area, residential amenity impacts, impacts on on-street parking provision, and also surface water drainage impacts from the curtilage works. As you're aware, planning applications require to be determined in accordance with the provisions of the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The assessment contained within the report has found that the development complies with the intentions of the policy and plan, and no material considerations indicate otherwise, and as such the development is recommended for approval subject to the conditions in Appendix 1 to the report. So happy to take any questions on that, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Helen. Does anybody have any questions for Helen? I just wanted to ask one quick question. And you said that some of the work had been started before planning had been approved. Are you happy with that situation? The fact that that's actually happened?
Well, we obviously would never encourage that,
No.
but it doesn't penalise the assessment of the
Okay.
application thereafter. I should note that the applicant, the developer, did stop when it was noted to them that the works required consent, and they're awaiting the outcome of these applications prior to any further works.
Okay, right. Okay, thanks. George Murray online. Can't hear him. He's on mute. Can't hear you, George. I'll leave. I'm going to.
Maybe ask George to leave.
Yeah. Okay, we'll try. George, can you leave the meeting and then come back, rejoin, and just in case it's a problem with your end. And in the meantime, I'll ask Mustafa to come in instead. Do you want to come in, Mustafa?
Hi, Helen. Good morning. Just a quick question around the parking. Said that I think some of the objectors were talking about impact on the parking. Sorry, maybe I missed it. I don't see a parking area there. Can you please elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
Go on, yeah, you want.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor Hussain. So currently, what is shown on the proposed site plan shows a very large hard standing area to the rear of the building to accommodate parking. It's not specified the exact numbers, and if you look at Appendix 1, one of the conditions requires the final layout of that to be submitted. So having looked at it with the Council's Roads Officer, it can safely accommodate parking for at least 2 cars, potentially up to 3. But the reduction in the overall demolition of the wall means that on-street parking is retained, which was the key concern raised in representation, understandably. So the position where the current field gate is to allow access would be widened. It's double yellow lines up until that point anyway, so we anticipate the reduction of 1 off-street parking space and the provision of at least 2 on-site parking spaces if the works are carried out. Hope that's sufficient.
Thank you.
Is that all right, Mustafa? Yeah. George, do you want to come in again, please? Just try again. Yeah, he's gone on. He's gone on. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe try and rejoin again. Like put his question in the chat would be just as good. Yeah. You, Robbie, you want to come in yet?
My question was the same as Mustafa's. The only thing I was saying was, if the wall's taken away, it's reducing the on-street parking, and is there sufficient parking for the neighbours?
Thank you, Councillor. So when we looked at that and we conducted the site visit, we estimated the number of parking spaces that would be reduced if the whole wall was taken down, for example, and that was between 2 and 3 spaces. With the partial demolition, which takes away a 5-metre stretch overall, that would only reduce on-street parking by 1 space, and given the potential demand from the existing property and they're providing 2 on-street parking spaces, we considered that was an acceptable balance.
Okay. Yep. Does George come? Did he come back? Did he? Try again, George. Just one more time. If you can't, put your question in the chat if you can't get through.
Try press F5, George, in your computer.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Just carry on there. Have to wait. Yeah. Yeah, we'll just get one of the, George, we'll just get one of the team to give you a phone call so that you can ask your question. Okay, thanks. Ian. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. This is historic anyway, so but I noticed from one of the pictures the entrance comes out in double yellow lines, but I presume since that's been historic, there's not a lot you can do about it. But because there's going to be more traffic now going in and out on these double yellow lines, does that have any impact at all?
Well, thankfully, the extension will take the access beyond that, so there'll be a bit more scope. I did get the roads officer to look at that because it wasn't one I was too sure of myself either. And he's of the view that given the nature of the corner and the way the street kind of works in the town, that it should be sufficiently safe, and taking the parking area to the location and size proposed should allow vehicles to actually turn on site, take a few points of turn, but they should be able to hopefully turn and come out nose first, which will make things a bit safer as well.
Okay. I'm just going to wait on George, are we? Okay.
A question.
Yeah, go ahead and ask another question. Yeah, keep going, think of questions.
This may be coming up on your next one, but what is the small building on the right hand side beside the? It obviously belongs to the house. It looks like a couple of rooms or something. So no.
Is that the kind of cream coloured one with the chimney?
Put your mic on. Right.
You're beating me. Wait a second. I'll get back to my own.
Put your
my
mic
own
on there,
things
Ian.
too. Oh yes, yes.
Ian, put your mic on. Aye.
Sorry, yeah, where the double yellow lines are on that corner.
That is the annex to the current building. So it was previously used as additional rooms for the guest house. And if you have a wee look at the floor plans, it's proposed as 2 additional bedrooms still to the main property with a shared bathroom rather than as a wholly separate unit of accommodation.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just let you Derek in, and then you can ask a question. Just well, George hasn't asked a question. He's made the following comment: I was round this location yesterday. The place is crumbling and would greatly benefit from upgrading. Okay. Okay, thanks. Right, Robbie.
If it's an annex and it's going to be a private dwelling house, how does that work out?
Well, as mentioned within the report, a house has a relatively wide range of meanings. So, for example, anyone in their own home, if they've got 4 bedrooms or more, can let out 2 for bed and breakfast use without planning. Houses can actually be for a house in multiple occupancy for up to 4 people before they need planning for a change of use. Some people just like having a lot of bedrooms. Okay. So it's up to the applicant to ensure they use it as approved, if it is approved as a house. If that use changes beyond the allowances of the 2 bedrooms for B&B or up to 4 for HMO, they would require to come back and make another application, so that could be considered.
Yeah.
Okay, right. So if there's no more questions, do members agree to the recommendation at 3.1 that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1? Okay. Right, we'll move on to item 4 then, which is application for listed building consent to various external and internal alterations, former Tower Guest House, Stornoway, 32 James Street, Stornoway. This listed building consent application is considered by the appointed officer to raise sensitive issues and is therefore referred to the board for a decision. And Helen will again speak to the report. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the accompanying list of building consent to consider specifically the impacts on the character and fabric of the listed structure. It's not related to the use or any other normal planning considerations. So you'll see that in the different wording in relation to the proposed works for the demolition to the boundary wall, retrospective removal of the rear porch, external curtilage works, alterations to openings, new roof lights and various internal works, and also the inclusion of replacement UPVC windows in certain openings, again at the former Tower Guest House on James Street. So same location. I won't bore you with it too much unless you've got any queries. You can see it just the centre right of your screen there. The list of building consent, as I said, relates to internal and external works, including the boundary alterations and works in the curtilage. The building is category C listed, which makes it of local importance. The site is also within the Stornoway Conservation Area, and the surroundings do include a number of other listed buildings to the east, north and west. Again, you can see the site layout there with the proposed indicative parking layout and the works to the boundary and the curtilage. I'll scroll through these quickly unless anyone wants me to stop, but just so you can see the context of the site again, and the works that have already been undertaken and the context. This presentation will also include shortly a few internal images so you get an understanding of the building. So one of the key concerns is damage to the property through damp and condensation due to a significant period of disuse. The building has minimal heating, a variety of window types, including timber and UPVC, none of which are in good condition, and also issues with the roof that are allowing water ingress and minimal insulation. So you can see some of the painted lath and plaster there with mould and damp and also flaking from the walls, and you can see that it's starting to damage the decorative cornicing at the top there. An image showing similar. You can also see some bare stone beneath the picture rail there, which you'll see in a bit more detail in the next image, where the water behind the lath had built up to such an extent that it collapsed. You can see that just to the right of the decorative shutters there. This is one of the ground floor public rooms. So the condition of the building is an important concern that we've reflected throughout the report when looking at the balance of the preservation of historic elements, the reinstatement where possible, or where not possible, what we can do to get the building to a usable condition for its long-term retention. One representation was received. It was a joint representation with the planning permission. So you can see it's similar concerns: impact on parking, impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area and the listed building due to the removal of the boundary wall, and also highlighted the impact on pedestrians due to vehicles crossing a wider length of pavement with the increased width of access. You should note that this assessment is only for the character and fabric of the listed building and its historic interest. It's been assessed through the report that while there will be some impact on the historic environment as a result of the development, it is assessed to be limited. The overall character of the building is retained, and that details to ensure this can be managed through conditions to the consent. It's therefore recommended the listed building consent is approved, subject to the conditions in Appendix 1 to the report. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks, Helen, again. Does anybody have any questions for Helen at all? Everyone happy enough with that? Okay, in that case, do members agree the recommendation at 3.1 that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1? Okay, so we'll move on to item 5, which is application for plan permission in principle to erect a house at 17C Valtos, Uig, Isle of Lewis. This planning application has been subject to 6 or more representations and therefore, in accordance with the scheme of delegation, is referred to the board for a decision. Helen MacDonald will speak to the report and answer any questions. Thanks again, Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So hopefully the last you'll hear from me today. Sorry for droning on. So you can see it's an application for planning permission principle for a house. So it contains very limited detail and is just seeking approval for the principle. Further details would require an application prior to any works on site. The site has been given the address 17C Baltos for the purposes of the application, and it's located in the village of Baltos in Uig. The aerial shot showing the wider context of the site. You can see the site outlined in red with the indicative house position highlighted with a yellow star at the top of the screen there. You can see the very disparate and spread out development of the Baltos village behind it. Again, Plan Permission Principle proposed within the rural settlement. The site extends to 0.17 of a hectare, which is just over a quarter of an acre. The site is on croftland. The surroundings are similar with other parcels of agricultural land and housing, and further beyond the private access is the public road to the southwest. The site is not within any area designated for habitats or species. It is within the South Lewis, Harris and North Uist National Scenic Area. Again, just an aerial shot zoomed in of the site and the indicative layout. I would highlight that it is just indicative, and any future application would require far more detail on this, and that's highlighted in the report and the proposed conditions. You can see an existing house with a grass roof, quite hard to see, but it's in the centre top of the slide with the aerial image there. Thank you, Fiona. The site has quite undulating topography, varies about 3 metres overall throughout the whole site, but it has some very sharp inclines and declines, as you can see in the contour plan there. Just to give you again some context, this is a view from the village road as we approach from the west. Help me with my directions, my apologies. I've highlighted the house number 15A that you saw with the grass roof immediately adjacent to the site, and the indicative position of the application site there too. This is us now moving further into the village, and you can see over the top of house number 9 the proposed site. This is viewed just from the beginning of the private access as it leaves the Baltos Road. So at the end of the private access, you can see number 9 that we're looking over the top of to the left there, where you can see the small orange boat is the beginning of the access to the proposed application site. This is standing on top of the higher portion of the site, looking back into the village. You can see a few houses there. There's a blue timber house and a hip-roof bungalow that sit right on the height of the main public road. Again, looking back towards number 9 in the right-hand corner there, and the wee boat is your kind of anchor position for seeing where you are moving around the site. That's facing about west-northwest. Just moving around to give you some context, you can now see the beginning of the access into the house number 15A, the timber house with the grass roof. That's their outbuilding in the top right. That's the house on the top left, and I'm in the indicative housing site looking out towards the coast there. That's now looking back towards, if you're familiar with Baltos, the pier site, which is mentioned in the report, and other housing heading out over towards the direction of Neep. 10 representations were received. They're all in an appendix to the report, and they can be summarised as follows. Key concern were impacts on neighbouring and visual amenity, potential negative impact on the national scenic area, landscape character impacts, the potential for an undesirable precedent set by the development, loss of croftland, impact on habitats and species, the impact on the road condition and the use of the road, noise impacts, drainage impacts, notification procedures carried out during the application were queried, as well as a number of non-material considerations which are detailed more fully in the report but cannot be a part of the planning assessment. There is also some imagery received with representations. I've included this one to give you some context where the rep centre viewed that this demonstrated the potential for undesirable precedent. You can see number 15A. Thank you, Fiona. It's brilliant. Just there, centre left, and the remainder of the village behind it there. Key planning issues raised in the assessment were the principle of development and the use of the house, were it to be developed, development scale, location and design, natural heritage impacts including landscape, residential and visual amenity impacts, potential for loss of agricultural land, construction traffic impacts, and drainage infrastructure and impacts on that. So where planning applications required to be determined in accordance with the provisions of the statutory development plan unless material planning and considerations indicate otherwise. The assessment contained within the report, including that considering representations, has assessed that the development does comply with the provisions of the development plan, and it is therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions to manage potential impacts and the delivery of the proposed development, and those are outlined in Appendix 1. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thanks again, Helen. Does anybody have any questions for Helen at all? Line? No. Ian?
Actually, yeah, I'll give you the NPA presentation. Number 3. It is dated there that it is in a scenic area, probably one of the prettiest scenic areas on the island. The planning has obviously determined that it's not affecting the scenic area of the area. It's a general question really, but what to me it kind of does in a way, but I appreciate that from a planning point of view it doesn't. When does something become too much for a scenic area? You get all easy questions today.
It's a nice open one, and you're going to get a planning answer. It depends. So obviously it's always a case of context and balance. So the scenic area here is the South Lewis, Harris and North Lewis scenic area. So it's a very large area. And you can think about the variety and type of development we get in that area. So there's guidance and policy on it to help us. There's also the description of the National Scenic Area in its designation from Nature Scott, SNH as they were, and that helps guide us through what the level of impact is and whether it would actually affect what they term the integrity of the National Scenic Area. So what we're aiming to protect is the overall area. Small developments can have unacceptable impacts. Some larger developments might not. It really does depend on the context. So we're only looking at principle here. The design of the house will be incredibly important because it is not necessarily a prominent site, but because it is quite high and the area does have quite a distinct character, it'll be important that any development would have to fit in with that, whether that's not necessarily doesn't have to be modern, doesn't have to be traditional, but it has to be responsive to the site and what surrounds it so that it is in harmony with the development that's already there. That's much harder, for example, on sites out with settlement, or for unusual development types, it might be much harder to accommodate them. But our assessment for the single house on this site is that the site has capacity to accommodate it if well designed and sited. So that's the basis of our recommendation for this particular application.
Thank you, very comprehensive. Yeah, so I think what you're basically saying is 15A seems to blend in with the area because it's wooden and grass things, but it's not a block of 10 flats going up the way, which wouldn't get done. Thank you very much.
Okay. Does anybody else have any? Mustafa online.
Thanks very much, Helen. It's just something similar to Councillor Macaulay there. We're talking about, I think one of the objection was that you worried that you'll set a precedent for developers. I mean, considering that number 15 is already there, what kind of precedent are we worried about that, you know, they'll be setting?
Well, planning always looks at precedent, obviously whether it's raising representation or not, and we would never want to set an undesirable precedent. We do have to consider development that's already either consented or on site. Having reviewed the proposal, the planning assessment is that we do not consider that would set an undesirable precedent. We're of the view that the site is already within the settlement pattern and character, and an appropriately designed house could be sited there within the existing settlement. So there's no precedent to set from our assessment, but obviously it's for members to take their balanced view on that.
Okay, thanks. Is that all right, Mustafa?
Thank you. Yeah.
Cheers. Okay. Is there any other questions? If there's If there's no other questions, do members agree the recommendation at 3.1 that the application be approved subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1? Okie dokie, right.
Agreed.
Thanks. So we'll move on to item 6, and that's the application for planning permission in principle to erect a house with associated infrastructure and services at 5B Island Flodder, Balavanik, Isle of Benbecula. This planning application has been subject to more than 6 representations which are considered by the appointed officer to be valid and raise material planning considerations. Therefore, the planning application cannot be determined under delegation and is presented to the board for a decision. Anne Napier will speak to the report and answer any questions. Anne, are you online?
I am, yes, sorry, I'm just trying to share the screen here. Thank
no
you,
worries.
sorry.
Thanks,
Can you
Anne. Cheers.
Can you see that now?
It's just loading at the moment. Yeah. Thanks.
Has that appeared, Chair? Thank you.
That's it, yeah.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. This application is for planning permission in principle for a single dwelling with associated infrastructure and services on land at 5B Island Flodder in Benbecula. This first slide shows the location of Island Flodder for those who are not familiar with the island, and Island Flodder is a tidal island, lies to the north of Benbecula and to the south of Grimsby, close to the Northford Causeway. The main part of Benbecula is to the west of the island, including the main north-south spine road, and with the airport in Balavanik located further to the west. This aerial view shows the approximate location of the site, of the application site, with the main road, Northford Causeway, also marked. Island Flodder is connected to Benbecula by a causeway, and this can be seen in the aerial image just to the north of the red arrow. The application site extends 2.1 of a hectare, which is approximately a quarter of an acre. It comprises predominantly rough grazing land and forms part of a larger area of croftland. It would be serviced by both a vehicular access from the slipway by the causeway and then onwards through the intertidal strand between Carlsflodder and Island Flodder, and also by pedestrian access across neighbouring croftland to join the public road. The vehicular access track would pass by an existing dwelling to the west of the site. The main part of the site is situated on land that's approximately 10 metres AOD, with the land rising steeply from the gated entrance adjacent to the coast. The site is not within a designated environmental area. It's some distance from designated heritage assets, and it's not within a national scenic area. Planning permission was granted for a dwelling on the site some 50 years ago, and 3 properties exist nearby without direct access to the public road. The application seeks planning permission in principle, much like the last application that you were considering. So if the principle is considered acceptable, the approval of full details would be secured by conditions and require the submission of a further application or applications. The submitted site plan indicates the location of the dwelling and the proposed access arrangements. The application includes an indicative layout of a modest single-storey dwelling with a turning area and parking adjacent to the dwelling. Vehicular access is proposed by a gate and track leading to the shore, with tidal access across the strand to the existing slipway off the causeway. And pedestrian access is proposed across neighbouring land to the public road. Services, water, electricity and the phone line exist on site already. So this slide shows the main part of the application site outlined in red towards the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. It's located with an area of land outlined in blue. And then heading off towards the right-hand side of the slide is a red line that identifies the proposed pedestrian access across the neighbouring croft and croft access to join with the end of the public road. The other red line towards the centre of the slide indicates the proposed vehicular access from the site to the shore across the tidal strand to the existing slipway off the causeway. This slide shows the same arrangement as the last slide, but in plan form. So existing properties nearby are also shown, including the cottage, which is number 5 to the west of the site, another cottage, number 6 to the north, and to the southeast is a converted former byre. This slide shows the proposed site in more detail. The application is seeking planning permission in principle, so the details show an indicative layout of a single-storey dwelling together with parking and turning adjacent to the property and drainage. As I've said before, vehicular access is shown to extend from the main part of the site to the shore, which is here, and then extend across the tidal channel to the top left of the slide. The application details refer to this route as an existing shared vehicular access, but this has been disputed by others in representations received on the proposal. We're now going to see a series of photographs of the site and the access arrangements. This first slide shows the turning area at the end of the public road, including the sign indicating the turning space. The inset image is taken to one side of the main photo and shows the 2 croft accesses leading from the public road. The proposed pedestrian route for the new dwelling would follow the route to the right. This next photo is taken about 160 metres from the end of the public road and shows the location of the access gate on the right-hand side, which the pedestrian route for the new dwelling is proposed to follow, going across the neighbouring croft. This image is part of the route through the neighbouring croft, looking back towards the access gate, although that's not in shot, and it's some 320 metres in length across the croft. There's no made path, as you can see, and the route is undulating and is boggy in places, even in June, which is when these photos were taken. The main image is taken from close to the application site towards the neighbouring cottage, number 5. The proposed vehicular access would cross this land to the shore before then crossing the tidal strand. The inset image to the top left is taken from the existing gate towards the shore, and as you can see, there's no constructed or engineered means of access currently from the shore to the site. The second inset image to the top right indicates that there's a notable change in levels that would be involved of about 5 metres between the shore and the application site. This image is of the site itself. The indicative siting of the dwelling is shown to be in the foreground of the photo on land that's broadly level, with the electricity pole and line located a short distance away. This final image is of the slipway to the tidal strand, with the inset photo taken to one side, indicating the gradient of the slope, which has been referred to in both consultation comments and representations. We received representations from 15 people on the proposal, and these are summarised in paragraph 10.3 of the report and set out in Appendix 4. The contributions that we received were detailed and specific and were generally quite lengthy. Many of those contributions raised similar issues, and this slide lists the main areas that people were concerned about. The applicant submitted a response to the objections that were raised, and the main points of this response are summarised in paragraph 11.2 of the report, and the key themes of the applicant's response are set out on the slide that's before you now. The key planning issues in this case are set out in summary on the slide. And firstly, the principle of the development of a dwelling in this location. And the report looks at this in relation to the development strategy, housing, accessibility and flood risk. The report also considers other potential impacts on roads, landscape and visual amenity, natural heritage, biodiversity and residential amenity. And it's also necessary to consider the potential benefits of the proposal in weighing up the issues concerned, in the planning balance. As set out in this slide, the main issue in this case is considered to be whether the principle of a new dwelling in this location would be acceptable. Although planning permission was previously granted for a dwelling on the site, this was approved in 1976, and there have been significant changes in planning policy and material circumstances in the intervening 50 years. As set out in the report, although SEPA have not objected to the development, an objection to the proposal was received from the Comhairle roads and flood risk section. They considered the proposed access route and parking arrangements would not be adequate. They've expressed concerns about the safety, suitability and feasibility of the proposed access route and the absence of detail about the access arrangements from the shore to the house. They've also raised concerns about the logistical challenges of transporting construction materials and also the absence of onshore parking areas for times when tide prevents access. A number of representations raised similar concerns, and the planning assessment on this main issue is set out across a number of paragraphs from 12.11 to 12.19 of the report. Having regard to the comments made and the issues concerned, the report concludes that the proposed dwelling would not be sited in a sustainable or appropriate location. No specific justification exists for a dwelling in this location. The access arrangements would be unacceptably hazardous due to flooding and the distance from the public road and the absence of a made path. And the proposed parking and servicing arrangements would be insufficient. There are a number of other matters that also require to be assessed, but as the application seeks planning permission in principle, the detail of the development is not before us currently. In the main, most of the other matters concerned are considered potentially able to be addressed, subject to the submission and control of appropriate details through the necessary separate application process. One exception to this would be information concerning potential environmental and ecological impacts, including biodiversity, particularly in relation to the vehicle access provision. We don't have details of any engineering works that might be required, and we do acknowledge that these details could have been requested, but given the circumstances where the principle of the proposal is considered unacceptable, we judge that a request for more information for these details would be unreasonable, as it would be likely to lead to additional costs for the applicant. In addition, no details of waste management arrangements or other servicing arrangements have been provided, and this too is considered to count against the proposal. In terms of benefits, the applicant has indicated that there would be personal benefits for her and her family, and the report also acknowledges that there would be limited but positive public benefits to the local housing stock, as well as likely social and economic benefits. This slide summarises the conclusion of the report, which sets out the planning balance, in this case within the context of the primacy of the development plan. The planning history of the site has been taken into account, but overall it's concluded that the limited benefits of the proposal would be clearly outweighed by the harm resulting from the erection of a dwelling in this location. The proposal would be contrary to development plan policies that seek to encourage the appropriate location for new housing and achieve acceptable living conditions for future occupiers. The harm arising from the proposal would not able to be addressed or satisfactorily mitigated by conditions or other means. So it's concluded that the proposal would be unacceptable in relation to the development plan and having regard to all material considerations. The report concludes with the recommendation that the application be refused for the reasons set out in Appendix 1 of the report. And this slide summarises those reasons and briefly sets out the harm that's considered to arise from the proposal. And thank you, Chair. That concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks a lot, Anne. Thanks for that. It was very comprehensive as usual. Can I ask for any questions, please? Is that online? Oh, it's Mustafa. Is that you again, Mustafa? Yeah.
You're already tired of me.
No, I never tired of you, Mustafa. Never.
Thanks, Anne, for this comprehensive presentation. I'm a bit confused, obviously, some clarifications. I think, what would you consider when you said a lack of justification of a dwelling, and what would be considered as justification for putting a dwelling in any position?
Well, there hasn't been a justification put forward, and as sort of indicated in the report, that although the Eilean flodder itself is connected by causeway, this particular site isn't. It doesn't have access to a public road. So it's almost, in a sense, similar to a situation that would arise for a proposal to erect a dwelling on an offshore island. And the policies that we have for development on offshore islands require that a specific justification exists for that type of development. And there may be justifications. Very often it wouldn't be for a residential property, though. As I say, one specific justification hasn't been put forward in this case, and clearly there are other sites which may not be available to the applicant to use, but there would be other sites available that wouldn't be in this position.
Thanks. Are there any other sites, under our local authority that similar to that, like considered a bit, access through tidal?
Precedent was mentioned in relation to with the last presentation, and that's certainly concerns that have been raised with this proposal as well by several people making representations. It's likely there would be several other similar sites or in sites in similar situations around the Outer Hebrides where proposals could come forward for development in similar circumstances. Every application's got to be considered on its merits, but the report does make it clear that if this were to be allowed, then it may well be harder for the local planning authority to resist other similar proposals in the future.
Are you aware of any existing housing dwelling at the moment that's in similar situation?
Well, there are 3 properties near the site, which has been made clear, which don't have vehicular access. These were all conversions of previous buildings, renovations of previous cottages, and I think one's a conversion of a byre. So there were existing buildings on the site, and that is distinctly different from the current proposal. Nothing exists on the site currently. So there are examples of buildings which have existed for some time. But this obviously is a proposal for a brand new dwelling.
But would you think, considering that there was an existing, although lapsed, but an existing planning permission for, in principle, and building warrant for dwelling in that same position, would you consider, in addition to the existing building, that this may justify a building there?
No, it's been quite clear within the report that we don't consider that's a justification. We acknowledge that planning permission was granted. It was nearly 50 years ago that permission was granted. Circumstances have changed significantly since then, and planning policy, the context of planning policy has also changed very significantly in that time. And the thrust of planning policy now is looking for dwellings to be built in the right location, where there's interconnectivity, where they're relatively close to services and facilities that can support residential occupation of the dwelling in the future. We don't consider the site to be a sustainable location for a new dwelling.
Okay. Thanks very much. It was just, when you look at, there was no objection from Scottish Water, there's no objection from SSE, there's no objection from SEPA, although I think you mentioned the report that, you're not satisfied with, what do you call it, the word escaped me, where sewage and things like that, obviously, but there is no objection from SEPA as well. So, yeah, thanks very much. I might come back later on with something. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Hal.
Okay, thanks, Mustafa. Ian Archie.
Thank you, Chair. My questions were exactly the same as Mustafa's. I'm kind of questioning the fact that it's been refused to, when there's already houses of residents in that area. In fact, there's a previous councillor of ours used to live out there who passed away a few years ago. It's I find it hard to understand why it's a no on this one, but
Did Morag want to come in? Morag, do you want to come in to answer that at all, please?
Yeah, it might help just to give some context to the role of the different consultees. So SEPA as a consultee is looking at the flood risk to the site itself, and the site being at 10 metres above ordnance datum, the actual site is not at risk of flooding. However, the access to a site is a matter for the planning authority. It's a matter for the local authority as the flood prevention agency. So in our case, Technical Services Department under Cal Mackenzie's team, they are the advisors to the council on flood risk matters in relation to access. So when we're looking at sustainability of an access to a site, we have to consider is that a reasonable place to allow new development, given that the access is effectively across the beach, across a tidal strand? There is no evidence of an existing access there. There is no parking at the road end, such that if the standard, according to policy, is for a house to have 2 parking spaces. If the tide were in and the potential residents of this house were to arrive, there is no alternative place for them to park on the public road. There is like a parking and turning area at the road end, but it specifically has a requirement that it's a bus turning area. It's not for general parking. There's the issue of where does waste, domestic waste has to be collected. Where would that be stored and where would it be collected from? If the council were required to, for example, service the development in terms of providing home care services, how do the staff, how would you access that site? You either have to use the pedestrian route that's proposed, or you would have to access the tidal strand. So these are kind of like all matters that collectively have to be considered in terms of sustainability of allowing a new development. It is acknowledged that there are existing cottages there, be they in permanent or holiday use, but they are, as can be seen, from the images, they look like they're converted former thatched houses. So I don't know if that helps kind of just give some clarity about what the development plan is seeking, that development is directed to the right places and that these are sustainable in terms of the ambitions of the development plan today.
Okay, thanks, Morag. Do you want to ask a question there, Mustafa? You wanted to come back?
Thanks very much, Morag. I was looking at, when you talk about, obviously, there is a pedestrian access, there's no, and there is, although a vehicle access, albeit tidal. Is there any mitigation, condition mitigation that may change this. On the other thing as well, when you're talking obviously about access to services from possible local authority, and my question is, when there is no objection from Scottish Water, Scottish Energy, and obviously they know themselves that they may require access in future for different services, but they still didn't object to a building there. The same things for existing parking. Where's the existing access to the existing dwelling, the converted thatch cottages and things? They still need access themselves.
Either, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you come back more.
I mean, yeah. So these will have presumably like either they'll have a pedestrian access, but we can't require a house that existed. You can't retrospectively require a house that exists to provide parking, because clearly when they were built as probably thatched buildings, Island Florida was still an island, and any access at that time would be on foot across either the tidal strand or through the crofts. So on services, I mean, Scottish Water, when we consult Scottish Water, they are only providing a response on three things: whether there is a conflict in relation to existing infrastructure, i.e. that the development could damage, buried services that are there; whether there is a public sewer that could service development, yes or no; and whether a public water supply can be provided, yes or no. The response does not guarantee a connection. So the grant of planning permission does not indicate that you will get a connection, but they're just indicating, is there capacity in the water system for Benbecula to service a development, yes or no? So it's a very high level response you get from Scottish Water. In terms of electricity, that is not, again, like our consultation with electricity is in relation to, is there a conflict with existing infrastructure? The provision of electricity is not something that's dealt with in planning. So whether the hydro are able to provide a connection through whatever route, that goes through a different process. So we're not, in terms of determining a planning application, we're not dealing with that. And then bins, well, the council are the body that has to collect waste. So for the small scale cottages are there, presumably these parties have to put in place arrangements to take away their own waste. Where they take it to, I'm not terribly sure, but the general expectation for new development nowadays is that you have provision for recycling and for residual waste, and that it can be collected under the normal domestic run.
Okay, thanks. So do you want to come back, Mustafa, before I move on?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is there, in terms of mitigation, is there any mitigations that could be put in to maybe remedy the access and obviously, I mean, like you said, Scottish Water, they have no objection for the waste management. Obviously, they must say that there is capacity there, for the sewerage I'm talking. But
so
is there any medication you can foresee, Morag, that will make this planning acceptable?
You come back now, Morag, thanks.
No. So, that's been looked at, and the report sets out like a clear assessment. On the Scottish Water, there is no sewer available. So, like many rural houses, Scottish Water are just saying we wouldn't service it, it would require a private system. But in terms of mitigation, there is there's no information there on how a track would be constructed down into the shore from the height of 10 meters, and then how it would be taken across the shore. You can see that there is like a bit of a ford, so that would also have to be crossed. So, and roads have Roads and Flood Risk have looked at it and they have raised concerns which are reflected in the assessment. So our advice is that there isn't mitigation in the situation.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, Mustafa.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks.
Okay, I'll just bring in Ian Archie now then.
Thanks again, Chair. Again, I'm coming in on the back of Mustafa. See in the cases of off-grid provision, which I assume this will be what this is kind of classified as. Is there not an option to grant planning with the various conditions for that the provide parking and the option is also for sort how they're going to deal with waste since it is at first since they're not going for full planning permission at this stage, or that in this case would it benefit us to have a site visit to see exactly what's the planner's point of view on this that I'm finding hard to fully understand, that which is a complete no, rather than okay, there are issues, but if this and that was sorted out, we could look at it then.
You want to come back, Morag, just on that point about please.
So our assessment is that there are fundamental issues here such that the principle is not acceptable. So the reasons that are given for refusal set out why it's assessed that the principle isn't, acceptable. So I'm not sure that a site, it's up to the committee obviously to decide whether they wish to take a site visit to any development, but I think the photographs of and can come back to the photographs illustrate the context of the site. So this is the slipway when you cross the causeway that was probably built maybe about 40 years ago, certainly probably in the time of Comhairle and Siar. So there is a causeway that goes over to Eilean Flodder. That was the fisherman's slip that was built, if you stay on with the one in the slip. So you're talking about somebody having to find land that they don't, presumably is not in their control, to acquire land to have parking somewhere in that vicinity, and then there would need to be information that would show how it's sustainable to have that as a route across that tidal strand as a sustainable route for today, given what the development plan policies are. So, it isn't an application in detail, but our assessment is that in principle, it is not acceptable in terms of the development plan.
Again, like I said, could that further detail be looked for? That you say that that we presume that they haven't got access to land. We shouldn't really be doing any decisions on any presumption. Just we should if there is an option, they should be given a chance to to sort out these smaller problems, in my opinion. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, right. Thanks, Ian Archie. Right, so are there any more questions? If there are no more questions, do members agree the recommendation at 3.1 that the application be refused for the reasons set out in Appendix 1?
No.
Okay, right, thanks. So we'll move on now to item 7, I've got a conflict of interest, so I'll step out of the meeting and I'll ask for Derek to call for chair. I just want to come in.
Okay, can I just formally call for a chair for this item, nomination?
Robbie,
I nominate Ian.
Councillor Robert Mackenzie nominates Ian McCauley. Do you have can I formally get a seconder?
I support that.
Okay, and no other nominations? Nope.
Thanks. Can I call a 5-minute break? 5-minute break. Thank you.
That's your first decision.
Hear me online?
Yeah.
Are we okay? Yes. Okay. Thank you, Paul. Number 7, application for planning permission for the installation of 5 by 200 metre circumference pens, associated infrastructure and a feed barge for Atlantic salmon marine finfish in North Graver Fish Farm and Graver on the Isle of Lewis. This planning application is an environmental impact assessment EIA application and has been subject of more than 6 representations. It is therefore in accordance with the scheme of delegation referred to the board for a decision. Ian MacLeod will speak to the report and answer any questions. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. So the application, as you can see, is for the installation of 5 200-metre circumference pens and associated infrastructure at a site called North Graver. It's a new undeveloped location on the east coast of Lewis, out with Loch Oran, and associated with not associated, sorry, with the existing North Graver Fish Farm, operated by the same developer. The proposed development will have a maximum standing biomass of 4,680 tonnes. The application surface area of all the equipment will be 16,290 metres squared, which is 1.6 hectares. All the subsurface equipment would be contained within the mooring area enclosed by the mooring lines, chains and anchors, which would extend to an area over 102 hectares in total. The planning application is an environmental impact assessment, an EIA application, and an EIA report comprised of several chapters was submitted to assess the likely significant effects of the proposed development on the wider environment and has informed the planning assessment. So this gives you just an idea of where the location is in terms of the eastern seaboard of Lewis and North Minch. And the following slide gives us a bit more context of where the site is, just off the coast of South Lochs. Again, just a rough idea from aerial imagery of where the site is in relation to Loch Oran and the rest of the Lochs coast. As I mentioned, the application site is 102 ha and lies in the North Minch, immediately adjacent to South Lochs coast. The site is currently undeveloped and the nearest fish farm under the control of the applicant lies approximately 900 metres to the southwest of the site. The nearest settlements to the site are the rural settlements of Calbost, which is just over 1 kilometre to the northwest, and Graver, which is over 2 kilometres to the southwest of the site. The immediately neighbouring landmass intervening between the site and these settlements is inclining hilly moorland and is characterised as Knock and Nature Scots Landscape Character Assessment. The site is not within any areas designated for its landscape qualities, but lies within the boundary of the Inner Hebrides and Minches SAC, Special Areas of Conservation, which is designated for harbour porpoise. At a greater distance is the boundary of the St Kilda SPA, North Rona and Sulsker SPA, and the Sulskeri and Sulstack SPAs, each designated for various bird species, including breeding gannets, which have a pretty large foraging range, which will include the site. There are 8 seal haulage sites within 50 kilometres of the proposed development, and grey seals and harbour seals can travel 50 kilometres from hollowed sites. Therefore, it's possible that seals could also interact with the site. The site plan gives a rough indication of how the site will be laid out. The green triangle at the top end of the pen indicates the north, and the orange rectangle to the south of the pens indicates where the feed bars associated would be. This gives a bit more detail of the site layout, showing the anchor configuration of the pens and of the feed bars. And again, this gives a sectional view of the proposed pen and top net specification. As I said at the start, the 200-metre pens, which are large pens, which seem to be more common now for offshore sites. The site will be serviced from the existing shore base at Graver, as can be seen right in the centre of this picture, and the existing site in Loch Oran is serviced from the site, and the new site will also be serviced from this site. This is a photograph taken from south side in Graver, which is the closest occupied area in relation to the existing site and the proposed site at Graver. The closest site occupied is actually at Calbost, and you can see from the visualizations which form part of the planning application that the site is not visible from either of these settlements. From Graver at this point here, you see the red arrow identifies the general location of the proposed site, which will be behind the headland, and there will be no visual connection with the settlement of Graver. The next site photograph is actually taken out with settlements offshore, and the first one is taken 1.5 kilometres north of the proposed site, and the other one is taken 1.5 kilometres to the west of the proposed site. These coastlines, you can see adjacent to the site, are uninhabited and form a backdrop to where the site would be if approved. Again, this is a view 4.7 kilometres east of the site that you would see heading south to north or north to south, and the development will be viewed with a backdrop of the rising land to the rear. Again, as can be seen within the visualizations which were submitted in support of the application. The key planning issues under consideration are nature conservation and interactions, ornithology, landscape and visual amenity, water quality, venting habitats and species, wild salmon and sea tide populations, priority marine features, climate change and biodiversity, conflict with other marine users, commercial fisheries and economic considerations, noise, light and waste. There were 11 representations were received objecting to the planning application. The main issues raised within the representations are identified at Appendix 4 to the report, but just in summary, they were excessive scale of development, negative impacts and conflict with commercial fishing vessels, loss of fishing ground and associated income, damage to shellfish stocks, damage to seabed, reduction in biodiversity, impacts on wild fish, negative impacts on landscape, and health and safety concerns. Development will impact on recreation, tourism and other businesses, increased risk of diseases, impacts on the SAC and associated habitats and wildlife, and increase in sea lice. But as noted there, all of these can be reviewed in full at Appendix 4 to the report. The planning application was publicised in accordance with the relevant regulations and was made available to inspect in person and online through the application period. The development plan has been assessed against the development has been assessed against the development plan comprised of National Planning Framework 4. The Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan is supplementary guidance for marine fish farming and the National Marine Plan. Having regard to the information available, including the EIA report, related appendices and figures and responses given to consultation from specialist consultees on the proposal, it is considered that the Planning Authority has sufficient information to enable it to reach a reasoned conclusion. The reasoned conclusion reads, following assessment of the proposal for its seascape, landscape and visual effects, impacts upon water column and benthic environment, impacts on the species of and habitats of conservation concern, and interaction with predators, interaction with wild salmon, impacts on commercial fisheries and other marine users, socio-economic impacts and other issues including noise and lighting, waste management, traffic and transport, biodiversity and climate change. It is concluded that subject to the development being implemented in accordance with the practices and commitments set out in the EIA report, and management and monitoring of mitigation and monitoring plans by condition, that the application would accord with the development plan and the relevant parts of the National Marine Plan. As such, the development is assessed to accord with the spatial strategy of the Outer Hebrides, and the principle of development on the site is assessed to be acceptable. Mitigation measures that are considered necessary can be secured by planning conditions and identified at Appendix 1 to this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. Any questions, any points? Probably Councillor Bob.
It's condition 17 and 18. It states that all the mortality will be ensiled on site. And it also states that if there's any breakdowns or something, that the mortality will be taken ashore. Now, it doesn't state whether the mortality taken ashore is whole fish or ensiled fish.
Sorry, in Appendix G, the fish mortality plan, it indicates that it's in the event of a mass mortality event, and that it will be whole fish that will be taken ashore.
So in that, what is the biomass of this existing site in Lochraver?
Don't have the biomass of the existing site to hand. It'll be contained within the report, though. I'd have to go through the report to get the total biomass of the existing site.
So this site we're talking about has got 4,600.
Yes.
4,000? Yeah. And they're saying that they're going to service it from the shore base.
Yes.
The shore base is minute compared to the size of this development. So the existing site, I'm surprised it didn't have conditions on it. So this one's additional, and the favourability of it is it's an offshore site, but yet it's still depending on the village of Graver to take all the mortalities in the case of an event. And with 4,600 tonnes and the tonnage of the other one, it's a huge event to take dead fish ashore. So I don't think they should be allowed to take fish ashore. Can't do anything about the site that's there. But the new site, it should be a condition that any fish has to be stored on that site on a barge or taken away by sea, because the shore base can't cope with that.
Our environmental health section were consulted on the application, and other again than raising concerns about storage ashore, they didn't raise.
But that's why the reason I asked you, was it ensiled fish or whole fish? How can you store whole fish in a sealed container? Ensiled waste you can put it in tanks. But whole fish, how can you put a whole fish in a sealed container?
Well, we've asked the applicant through condition to provide more detail. Well, details of where the ensiled fish is going to go, but also that any fish that are taken ashore, how can they not be stored within a sealed container?
Because the fact is they'll be taken in tubs, and if these tubs are sealed, it'll be a polythene bag around them and a cable tie inside a tub. Once that fish starts deteriorating, the volume increases with the wastage, and these bags have been known to burst, and the liquid spill out. And you were talking about a big event in the village of Grava. which I don't think people there signed up for.
That's acknowledged, councillor, and I mean, it's like I say, our environmental health section were consulted on this element of the application and made no concerns about it. But I mean, the over and above the conditions, there are also statutory nuisances that can be dealt with under environmental health legislation.
That's after the event.
No, not necessarily. If we're aware of the event occurring, it can be dealt with.
And is it not appropriate that we could put an additional condition in?
It is, if you choose to recommend that.
Well, I recommend.
Thank you. Before we go on, can we get the comments of anybody else? Can I call Councillor Susan Thompson?
Thanks, Chair. Ian, I'm just wondering if you can help me reconcile the two different points of view about the net, pardon the pun, social, economic value of this. So the Western Isles Fishermen's Association says that it'll have a detrimental impact on their industry, and the applicant says, you know, gives us quite detailed figures about the positive impact it'll have on theirs. And I'm concerned that the fish farm will bring about that economic benefit potentially by displacing an industry that's already providing an economic benefit to the Western Isles. So can you help me reconcile those two points of view, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's accepted that the development, if consented, is going to have impacts, and it's been summarised in the EIA report. It'll have indirect and induced benefits. It is going to cause displacement from commercial fishermen. There's no question about that. In the context of the area, the site is within a statistical rectangle, which covers quite a large portion of that area of the North Minch. The site only represents 0.06%, of that entire statistical rectangle. So while we acknowledge it is taking away fishing ground and associated economic income to fishermen, it's also on balance providing full-time jobs and additional employment in the area. So it's not being dismissed that it's not going to have an impact at all. But on balance, it's considered that it will also bring a positive element to the economy.
Would you like to come back, Susan?
Yes, please. Do we have figures about what value the industry that will be displaced will provide? So this proposal talks about the direct value and the supply chain value. Do we have figures about the direct value and the supply chain value of the fishing and the commercial fishing industry, so that we can compare the two, so that we're not, so that we've got all the facts, so that we're not encouraging this displacement that will have a net negative effect, or at least that we're doing it consciously, that we know exactly what we're agreeing to.
Yeah, there was an economic assessment conducted as part of the proposal, which has the full details of the assessment that was carried out. According to the applicant, they sought hard figures from the fishing industry in relation to any economic loss of the site, and they were unable to get that. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know. But section Section 12.274, the socio-economics, access and recreation element of the report covers the relevant section of the submission in relation to economic impacts.
That was the part that gave me some concern, actually, because it said that although the Western Isles Fishermen's Association did give them details, they weren't able to use those details because they weren't in the correct format, or it wasn't information that they could use. Apparently the timing of when the fishing took place wasn't included, so they couldn't use that information.
It would be a very difficult thing to quantify, I suppose, with fishing being seasonal, different times of the year, different areas, weather dependent. I'm not an economist. The section of the EIA that was submitted relating to loss of income and, you know, positives and negatives are something that we've had to give weight to in the lack of other information.
No, I understand that. It was just to try and get some clarity myself. It seems to me that while this will provide economic benefit, it may be at the cost of another industry. And because I can't quantify what that benefit is, I'm struggling to make an informed choice on this one. But I appreciate if you don't have the information, you can't share it. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you very much, Susan. Before I go to the staff, I got a question myself, Ian, sort of relating to that. The sizes of the cages, the 5 by 200 meters. I understand this area that's going to be used has been used as a unique shelter for generations, is what I heard, where all the fishing boats go to tie up in the case of bad weather. And was that taken into consideration in that it's going to limit when the boats can actually go out, and therefore, as Susan was saying, it's that been taken into account with the balance between the social and economic reasons on both sides?
Yes, I believe it has, and as I've said, I don't think anywhere within any of the submitted information or from the report itself does it dispute or dismiss that it's going to remove an element of fishing ground, an element of sheltered ground during westerly and southwesterly gales during the winter. But again, while it's a big site in fish farming terms, it represents a small area of the North Minch, and it will also introduce a new navigational obstruction in the area. I don't think it's an area where boats necessarily lie off. I think that it's certainly an area that will be fished at certain times of the year. Yeah. Again, like a lot of matters in planning, it will be on balance.
Thanks, Ian. Can just leave a light on, I think. My first time up here, I'm busy in the spun everything. Can I ask Mustafa?
You forget your chairing, Ian. Thanks very much, Ian. And yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about displacement. I think Councillor Susan just raised that and discussed that quite at length, so I don't want to go back on that again, but I just want to, I think, talk about the additional road access, obviously road traffic access to the small existing Garvan shore base. I think, have that been taken into consideration? And I think for that reason, I would support what Councillor Kinsey said as a condition that the moorts and whatever should be dealt with at sea instead of being brought to shore. Thanks.
Thanks, Mustafa. There's no question there, is there? No, you're just supporting Robbie.
Just to support the condition, I think that Robbie was saying,
Thank you, Mustafa. Any other questions or points before I go back to Robbie? No. Robbie, were you wanting to put a condition on?
He's
Sorry, can you start again? I didn't know the red line.
Yeah. That the mortality is contained on the side, either on a barge or a boat comes in and takes it away, and it hasn't to go to the shore base.
Okay. Can we have a second? Anybody want to second that?
I do.
Mustafa, thank you very much. Would the officers like to comment on that?
I think if I can maybe come in on that, Chair, that it can be delegated to the chief officer to to draft a condition which is additional, which either amends the condition that's there already, or adds an additional condition to the effect that all that no morts can be stored at the shore base, that they must, from that site, they must be taken away by sea.
Thank you, Morag.
If that's acceptable.
Yeah, that's fine.
Robbie's indicating he's happy with that. Mustafa,
Yep.
happy with that. Rest of the board happy with that, or any other questions? Are members in agreement with the recommendation at 3.1 that the EIA planning application be approved, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1 and the additional one by, sorry, will I do that? Can I call in, who's that? Sorry, Susan again. Sorry, Susan.
No, just to say that I couldn't support it as it is.
Would you like to move against it, Susan?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, have you got a planning piece just now, or would you like to defer or break up for 5 minutes or 10 minutes? Or
I imagine that'll have to happen, but I don't believe the socioeconomic impact has been proven to be sufficiently strong. I think the displacement of the existing industry requires to be clarified.
Okay, Susan, thank you for that. Can I ask if Susan's got a seconder? I'm happy to second that, Susan. Anybody else got anything else to add? So we'll call a timeout, and with the timeout protocol, I'll ask Derek to.
So maybe sorry. I will now, if you call a 10-minute adjournment, and Susan will send you the link to an online meeting in Committee Room 4 with legal advisor, planning advisor, and the seconder of the proposed amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your patience. Can everybody hear me online?
Yep.
Thank you. So, Councillor Susan Thompson, would you like to read out your proposal, please?
Thanks, Chair. That the application be refused on the basis that the applicant has failed to demonstrate that the proposed development would not result in an unacceptable exclusion of commercial fishing activity from a historically important and economically productive fishing ground, contrary to policy ED4 and supplementary guidance of the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan and policy 32 of NPF4.
Thank you very much. And that's seconded by myself, Councillor Ian Macaulay. Is there any further recommendations or amendments, or does anybody wish to move the original recommendation in the report? Or would you, Councillor Robert Mackenzie, want to move the approval with the fish mortality conditions.
If it's going for refusal, that would take care of the dead fish.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no other proposals by anyone, no other comments by anybody, the proposal by Susan Thompson and seconded by myself, Ian Macaulay, will become the finding of the meeting. And that is the end of 7A, and I think that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all for coming, and have a great Christmas and New Year, everybody, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you very much.